Okay, I guess we should get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Raj Mahale. I'm the moderator and the chair of Center for Global Business. And we're lucky to have Robert A. Williams as our guest speaker tonight. He has a breadth of international experience, especially international finance. And Robert, I am going to tell you, our students are very engaging. I have a lot of questions from them. And I have actually been a guest lecturer at some of the Ivy schools up here in the Northeast. And our kids are bar none, some of the best. Some of the questions that you're going to get are bar none. I'm pretty amazed. So without further ado, let me introduce you, everyone, to Robert A. Williams, who is the CEO of Scotiabank Costa Rica. He's a senior VP of Central America, and he's joined our advisory board at Center for Global Business. So, Robert, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself, your educational background, and what drew you to the career of international finance, please?
First of all, thank you. And this is a real honor to be here with all of you. And I look forward to being in Austin in about 2 weeks' time. So very excited about that. So what drew me to international finance? Believe it or not, it was kind of happenstance. And what I mean by that is my father was a British banker. He was an expat as well. And while I was young, we moved around a lot. And for some reason, at some point in time, when I started going off to college, I didn't really want to move too much anymore. Overall, I've lived in 11 countries. And when I mean to live, I actually mean being there for more than a year, going to the groceries, paying bills, and all that stuff. And so when I went to UT, I actually studied engineering. So I didn't study a typical, as a matter of fact, it was architectural engineering. So it's not something that you would typically associate with finance. And when I started my sort of professional life, I actually started off as an engineer, as a resident engineer in construction projects. I quickly realized that after I had started working as a resident engineer, that it was something that wasn't really going to fulfill my expectations of what I wanted my life to be. And so I then decided to go into something a little bit more adventurous. And I began, I have a commercial diver's license. So I started to provide petroleum or crude oil offloading from certain tankers off the coast of Central America. There's a small group of divers that would do that. And we go to different countries and we'd offload the crude oil. And I did that for about 2.5 years. I quickly realized as well then that was not going to be something I wanted to do all my life. And the reason was it was very taxing on the body. And I had other divers that were working with me. At the time, I was somewhere in the range of about 25 years old that, were 5 years older, but they really, they had really weathered working underwater for so many years. And interestingly enough, I was at a friend's wedding, and the HR head or the human resources head for Scotiabank was there, and we were sitting at the same table. And I was speaking to another friend of mine in English, and she sort of looked at me and said, "You speak English very well." And I said, "Well, yeah. I mean, I'm half British and Salvadorian because I was born in El Salvador." And she said, "Would you be interested in coming for an interview?" And I said, "Well, where do you work?" And she gave me the background of Scotiabank. Scotiabank had recently bought a bank in El Salvador. And I said, "Look, I don't know anything about banking at all." And she said, "Doesn't matter. Come and visit us." And I went over and I sat down with a gentleman by the name of Jerry Moyland, who was the head of risk. And they were looking for people who spoke English because they'd recently bought this bank. They were having a big challenge communicating with head office. At that time, Scotiabank was in the initial phase of buying different banks in different locations. and they really hadn't built out their international banking department. So the problem they were having is they had all of these subsidiaries that they were buying in different locations, but they couldn't communicate properly or effectively with them. So that's how I actually entered into finance. I entered into finance because I could speak English very well. And so, from there, I've been 22 years with the bank now, which is amazing. And I've had a wonderful career. During that time, like I said, I've lived in multiple countries. I lived in 6 countries when my, as a child, when my dad was a banker for Lloyd's, which is a British bank. And then with Scotiabank, I've lived in El Salvador. I've lived in Panama, in the Dominican Republic, in Toronto. I've lived in Canada, in Toronto, and now more recently here in Costa Rica about two and a half years ago. And so that's sort of been my path. In addition to studying engineering, because I realized that if I wanted to really grow within the organization, I needed to know a little bit of finance. So I got an MBA, right, so that I could actually read a balance sheet. And then after that, later on in my career, I also got a master's in law from the University of Liverpool in international business law. So that's been sort of my background academically and a little bit of how I started in international finance.
No, that's wonderful, Robert. So, I think we're contemporaries. So when I went to University of Texas, I was a double major, an IB major, and a government major. And what we've done now for our students is our expanded IB offerings as a minor. So just imagine when you were at UT, when we were at UT, you could have actually done a minor in IB.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, just building your global career, right? So can you advise us on some of the decisions, the steps that you've made throughout your career that contributed to the success that you had in international finance area in general?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, once I entered the bank and I started working and I realized I was actually quite good at sort of banking in general. One of the things that I recall from every step in my career is that no matter where I was, I always had a 5 and 10-year plan. Like I always had in my head where I wanted to be in 5 years and where I wanted to be in 10 years' time. And so, and obviously that evolves because as you take on the next step, then the hill changes or the mountain changes, right? So I remember when I was in El Salvador working for the bank, my aspiration, my 10-year aspiration was to become the CEO in El Salvador. Well, I never became the CEO in El Salvador, but I became the CEO in Panama, and then I became the CEO in the DR, and then I became the regional head for Central America in the bank. So, but I always had a destination that I was working towards. So I would say that has always been a critical part of me being able to build a career. That is, I've always had, and then in addition to having clarity in that, and again, that's it. It evolves, right? It's not static, it's dynamic, because obviously in 5 years, a lot of things happen and you can change roles within the organization or anything like that. But I always used to have, if I changed my role and the opportunities changed, then I would set again my next plan for my next 5 and 10 years. So that's one thing. The other thing that I would say is I always understood the stakeholder composition. And what do I mean by that? When you're in a multinational organization like mine, you can only have so much. I mean, you obviously own your career, but there's a lot of people that have a lot to say about where you go within the organization, right? Whether it's people in HR, whether it's your immediate supervisor, or just broader senior vice presidents or executive vice presidents in the organization. So I always made sure to understand who were the critical stakeholders so that when I wanted to go to my next level, who I had to sort of be close to, socialize with. And that also helped me a lot. because I was known. I was known within the organization. Even though I was in Central America, in El Salvador, people knew me, and that helped a lot. The other thing that I would say is I was always willing to take risks, calculated risks, that is, okay? A lot of people like to stay in their comfort zone. So they feel comfortable doing this task and they feel that, you know, I become indispensable in this role. And as a result of that, I'm never gonna find myself in an adverse situation. The reality is that that can happen, but that does limit your growth. That does limit your growth. So I was always able to take calculated risks. I started in risk management in the bank, and then I moved to treasury. I knew nothing of treasury. I moved over to treasury. I learned about treasury on the way. Then I moved on to the banking side. By that, I mean lending and stuff like that. Again, I knew nothing about structuring credit, but I moved over to that anyway. And then when I finally got the opportunity to become a general manager, I applied for the role and I got it. And I knew nothing about being a general manager, nothing. But I always felt that I had enough within me to be able to drive through any of the challenges that might come through the process of growing into a new role. And I think that's really helped me a lot. And I would say that when I look back on my career, I did some lateral moves, but most of the moves I made were vertical. And I will say that not all moves were net positive individually. So you have to sometimes be willing to take a step back if you see that taking that step back will likely catapult you at the next change. And I think but again, you have to sort of think these things through. You can't just do it off the cuff. You have to sort of be very methodical about it. And I was pretty methodical about sort of owning my career and making sure that I knew what I had to do to get to the next level.
Yeah. That's wonderful, Robert. So you want to just paraphrase this because I think it's really important for their students. Listen, do not get discouraged about job opportunities. If the first door doesn't open, the second door doesn't open, there's opportunities out there, and you really need to take some risks yourselves. And what Robert said was just Yeoman's advice is it's about getting your first foot in the door, coming up with a plan, finding the rabbi per se, the individuals that are the stakeholders, understanding and take risks. Take a half step back to go 3 steps forward. So that's wonderful advice, Robert. I just want to piggyback off of that. And working in global finance, you navigated different diverse cultures, as you mentioned, regulatory environments, et cetera. And can you share some of your experiences which you have faced challenges in this context and how you overcame it?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that being fully bilingual was obviously a positive, right? I mean, I've worked in Latin America all of my life with the bank and in other organizations earlier on. So being, speaking English and speaking Spanish fluently has been important. And it's not just about, and I think this is important, it's not just about speaking the language. It's about understanding the messages behind the language, because people have different cultures and in different locations, people have different ways of expressing themselves, business norms and so on. And even in places like Costa Rica and Panama, which are two countries that are next to each other, they're very different and people speak very differently. So I would say that beyond being fully bilingual, I think the ability to be able to read behind the lines in the messaging has been very, very helpful for me. Obviously, with a British father and a Latin mom, I was able to live that at home as well, right? I was able to live that sort of difference. And I remember, I still remember now as an adult when I was a child, and I'd be sitting at the living room with my parents and my sisters, and we'd be talking, And every time we would address my dad, we would address him in English. And every time we'd address my mom, we would reply to her in Spanish. So the conversation at home was always, completely immersed in both languages. So that for sure has helped me, and it's also helped me accommodate the new cultural experiences that I go to every time I go to a different country. I would say the other thing is I've traveled a lot. In addition to having lived in 11 countries, I've done a lot of traveling with the bank and without the bank. And again, I think that opens your mind. It opens your your ability to understand people differently. And I think that's a critical component when you're in an international organization, because international organizations are filled with people from different locations. There's a lot of people now from Latin America sitting in Toronto overseeing the operations in Latin America, something that when I joined the bank didn't exist. So it's a dynamic sort of evolution of how organizations change, and having that ability to be flexible, I think, is important.
So Robert, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go
Finish your
ahead.
thought.
Go ahead, please.
No, so you have a unique perspective since you did get your MBA and your law degree, right? So as you're aware, I'm a lawyer. I've done a lot of international M&A and funds practice all over, particularly in Asia and the Middle East. But if people are similar students considering pursuing MBAs versus a law degree, did the combination help you, or one or the other help you? I mean, I'm just curious about that.
Absolutely. I've gained. Look, I'm I'm an avid learner. Like I have a life motto, which is that life is learning is a lifelong journey, right? And I think that the day you decide that you've learned enough is really the day that you die as a person, right? I mean, I see life as a great opportunity to absorb as much as you can while you're here. All right. And I know there are times when you feel tired about it, but it's really a blessing to be able to have the opportunity to learn from different cultures and different people and different organizations. So having a positive mindset towards that is important. And to me, the combination of my engineering degree, my MBA, and my law degree, which, by the way, the MBA and the law degree I ended up taking that because I recognized that there were some hard skills that I needed to fine tune. They've been very, very, very helpful for me, very helpful to me.
That's key. So that it dovetails into the next question. Having all that, in your opinion, what was the most important skills or qualities that someone needs to succeed in building this type of a career?
I mean, there's a combination of skills, both hard and soft skills, that I think are necessary. And they're applicable not only to international finance careers. I think they're applicable across the board. I would say foreign language proficiency, if you're going to be working in, let's say, if you're working in Asia, knowing the language of some of those countries is obviously a positive. In my case in particular, Latin America was very easy for me because I brought it from home. But I think foreign language proficiency is a hard skill that is good to have. I would say international business law and regulations is an area where banking is a heavily regulated industry, and even though there's a lot of there's a big movement across all regulators to harmonize regulations globally, and even the local regulators are looking to OSFI in Canada, or the FSA in the UK, or in the US. Everybody's looking to try to harmonize how to regulate the industry. And then you add on top of that the supranational entities like Basel, that's coming in and putting capital requirements to all of the entities. Then that's been very helpful, learning about international business law and regulation. I would say strategy formulation. So I learned about strategy formulation on the go, to be honest with you. I mean, I would not lose an opportunity with the strategy folks to sit down and listen to them as they were asking questions to the different areas when they were formulating a strategy. So strategy formulation for me has been instrumental, especially at the CEO level. You know, you know, I would honestly recommend people to do a little bit of strategy if they can within their academic career or early on in their career. So I think that from a hard skill perspective, those are critical issues. On the soft skills, I would say resilience, and it goes back to your comment earlier, Raj. Don't give up. You know, ultimately, it's true. The old adamant that says, you know, persistence is critical. Persistence is key. You just stay on it, and it'll come to you. Don't give up. So resilience and that ability to get up. If you're told no one time, if you're told no twice, if you're told no three, that's fine. You just keep at it, and it'll get to you.
100%.
I would say empathy. Empathy is critical. I have a saying with my staff, and I say, you know, be hard on the issue and soft on the people. You know, I think that's worked very well for me across the different sort of cultural nuances that I see in the different countries. Cross-cultural communication is another skill. Problem solving, and being able to make decisions. You can't imagine how many people within international organizations, including my own, are absolutely scared to make decisions. They just freeze because they think that they're putting at risk their careers, and the reality is, if you're making your decisions based on data, based on what you know is right, then you know things will turn out well for you. I mean, I've never been afraid of making decisions, and I think that's also helped me in my career.
Thank you, Robert. So let me ask you as a student, right? So I have two daughters in college right now, and you know, they're sophomore, juniors, and I'm a sophomore, junior here at UT. I'm an IB major, and I'm really, really interested in getting into international banking, international finance. Taking everything looks overwhelming. Like, what do I do? I'm talking to my advisors, talking to my professors, talking to family, friends, you know, mentors. What would be some of the baby steps you would recommend to do now to have that launch pad into directing myself to that type of a career?
Well, I think that if you can do internships with financial institutions, that's definitely a plus. And we've spoken about that in the board, you know, and I think part of our role is to see how we can help with that. But internships definitely add value. I would say, you know, get versed in things like digital transformation and data analytics. Okay, that's really the future and the trends that we're seeing in finance, especially because the value propositions that are being crafted nowadays are much more precise by segment and even get to the point of individuality. So learning about data analytics and data management, I think is an area that finance is going to be looking at people to have some skills in. I would say AML regulation. AML is anti-money laundering. The compliance areas of banks have become significantly large because of the sort of combating that financial institutions are required to do by regulators as to money laundering. So AML regulation is an area. So, for example, you were talking about, you know, lawyers. You know, our regulatory and compliance units are filled with lawyers, right? So again, you don't necessarily need to be a finance major to be in finance. And then I would say something like sustainable finance. Everything that has to do with ESG, I think is something that the international finance is moving towards. There's big momentum with that. So those would be areas that I would recommend students to look into and sort of, get versed in as they are studying and when they, when they look for opportunities in internships.
Again, piggybacking off what you said, looking ahead at some of the other global trends and future of international finance, future of a lot of our professions, AI
Yep.
is coming. Well, what is your thought process on AI and impacting international finance and banking, and how are you approaching that?
Yeah. In Scotiabank, we are using AI, but we're not using it to its full capacity yet. I think it's the problem with AI at this moment in time is that the output that you see in AI is very dependent on the data sources, right? And so you have to make sure that your data sources are extremely clean and that they're basically void of errors, because or else the algorithms that are built in the AI can start to provide erroneous suggestions. So where have we used it? We've instead of AI, I would say we've done a lot of automation. Okay, so more than AI at this moment in time. Now, this could be something that we'll see going forward, more AI engaged. But right now, automation is where we're focusing a lot. And what is automation for practical purposes? So automation is the creation of robots, right? Tech bots, right? That basically automate a mundane task that usually you need people to do. Okay. And so we've been able to create significant efficiencies, including here in Central America, through automation. We currently manage about 360 bots in our back office, which has allowed us to create digital end-to-end experiences with clients that are much faster and much cleaner. But again, the algorithm has to be very precise, because the problem is when an algorithm goes awry, the size of the operational impact can be huge. And I think that's an area that you have to put a lot of attention to if you're gonna. That's why I think that many entities are not yet fully engaging in AI, because they recognize that unless you have a very clean data source, you can create biases within your output that end up impacting your business and actually costing you money.
Absolutely. So would you recommend our students to look into automation and embrace AI, but look into automation and other soft skills that can help them, gain valuable skill sets that when you're interviewing for potential opportunities in international finance, those skill sets will help?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And would you recommend getting some experience between undergrad and maybe then getting your graduate degree, to understand if you really is this what you want to embrace, and so on and so forth?
Yeah. So about 2 years ago, no, sorry, let me see. It was in 2019. No, 2021. Yeah. About 2 years ago, I actually I went to a coding boot camp at the University of Toronto. It was a 6-month course to learn about coding, and it was basically CSS. It was HTML, JavaScript, and React. Those were the languages that I was looking into. And the real reason why I went to that, not because I was going to become a developer, but I always felt that I was at a disadvantage when I was talking to my automation teams. They would always come back to me with technical jargon. And I found that I always felt like, are these guys really giving me the true story here or not, right? And so I went ahead and took that. And more recently, I just finished about 6 months ago an AI course at the University of Oxford, It's an online program, just to understand, what is the background of AI and all of this stuff. I found that learning about these two things, again, I'm not going to become a specialist at that. That's not my intention, but it at least gave me the raw material to be able to sit down with developers that work in the bank and some of the people that do some of those robots, to be able to have fulsome conversations. And given the fact that they knew I'd taken some of those courses, they were a little bit, I feel they were a little bit more precise in our conversations, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. And so you'd encourage gaining some soft skills, even online, constantly, like you said, constantly learning and developing your skill sets it's a good opportunity, a good plan to pursue. I'm going to pivot a little bit. We have about 25 minutes or so. Our students are exceptional, as you are aware. They provided us with a list of their questions, and I've gone through them in detail. Some of them are redundant, but I'm going to try to address all of them if we can in the next 20, 25 minutes or so. That's okay, Robert?
Yeah,
Um, question from one of our students is, with the current political turmoil going on in Central America, how does that affect business conducted there, if at all?
Yeah, so political turmoil in Central America has been the norm. Okay. So to be honest with you, it's not affecting it very much. It depends on the country. Okay. So Nicaragua is, I mean, I don't want to get into political discussions here, but Nicaragua is a very, very challenging country to operate in. Okay. The government there, there's a dictator there, and it's absolutely difficult to do any sort of business there. Guatemala, I think that overall, the business environment there continues to be driven by the private sector more than the government. So I would say that it's a country where you can do business, but I find it to be very insular. So it's a country that seeks to operate within its borders, and the entrepreneurs are very protective of the Guatemalan sort of business environment. So it's hard to enter Guatemala. It's hard to enter Guatemala unless you're going in there with a solid local partner. El Salvador, with its new president, which I'm Salvadorian, so I feel more comfortable being a little bit more political on this. I think, he's done a lot of good when it comes to the criminality that was really creating havoc in the country. But the fact that he went against the Constitution to get reelected, I think is something that in the long term will turn out to be detrimental for the country. Right now, it's sort of living a hype. But I would say that rule of law is something that you have to keep your eye on in El Salvador, especially as time goes on and this person decides to stay in power. Now, if he doesn't, and in 5 years' time, because the election was this year, and he moves on, then great, and so be it. But for right now, it's becoming a uni-party country, right? So now only the president's party, they have 90% of the votes. So it's concerning from that perspective. Costa Rica and Panama are two business-friendly countries. They've continued to be so. I wouldn't say that there's any political turmoil, not anything beyond what you would see in the typical fray of politics. So I don't see. I mean, unless you're thinking about going into Nicaragua, the other countries in Central America, they're going to have their nuances, they're going to have their challenges, but you can do business.
Have you ever worried about your own safety concerns, Robert? I'm just curious because I mentioned that because I've had a couple countries like Romania and when I went to Mexico City years ago, the firm hired security detail. I thought it was overkill, but I did feel like a celebrity.
No, actually, I don't have a security detail. I walk to the bank every day. My office is basically, I live about 4 blocks away from the bank. And I walk to the bank every day. I have a chauffeur and I have a bank assigned vehicle, which I use very little actually. I use it more for visiting clients and so on, but no, I don't. In Panama, I don't walk to the bank only because it's very hot. And second, where I live, it's pretty far away from the bank. But again, you can go to the street, and I don't find that I need security. And I would say the same thing about the DR. When I was in the DR, I never needed. My predecessor in the DR, she asked for security detail to be with her all the time. So she had, I think she had a driver and 2 security guards. I've never felt the need, and I asked them to be. I think, in my view, you call more attention to yourself, and so I don't have security details now.
Yeah, I was bummed because I'm an explorer like you, Robert. I love to just try to get lost and find my own place. And when I was in Mexico City, they just told me what I could and couldn't do, and I was pretty distraught.
Yeah,
Um,
I think I would say one thing about this though is I pretty much know where to go and where not to go. Okay. So I think that's the key here. I mean, they're like every city. I mean, you can go to New York and go to places where you know nothing's going to happen to you. And then you can go to New York and go to places where you know something's going to happen to you. So I would just say, I think you just have to be,
Oh yeah,
understand.
I'm in New York. Trust me, these days that. Another question, if I may, please.
Yeah.
Another great question. So, you work with other companies globally, right? In what you do. Have you experienced the challenges working with other companies, the problems? How do you resolve them? How does it work in international finance?
Okay, so let's split this into 2 types, right? Just to give it some structure. Let's call it the first type suppliers and the second type clients. Okay. Um, uh, on the client side, the normal challenges that you meet with, in financing, typically when they're looking for loans and stuff like that, you have to structure the credit properly. And sometimes the requirements that are associated with that credit can generate some challenges and some heated debate sometimes with the client, but it's all normal course of business. So I would say no. I don't think that I faced any challenges beyond what you would do in working with any other corporation. Okay. More recently, in the banking industry, and this is more of a regulatory requirement from a regulator in Canada, and not it was OSFI. They've asked us to basically start monitoring the risk management of suppliers. Okay. So it's called TPRM, third party risk management. And that has caused some friction with suppliers. And I'll give you an example. We are in certain markets where there's only one supplier for a particular service or a particular product. And when we ask these people to fill out the 250 questionnaire, 25 pages, so that we can feel comfortable that they're a supplier, some of them just come back and say, we're not going to do this. And some of the challenges that we do face back in head office is they can't comprehend that. How can you not want to be a supplier for Scotiabank, right? So that's how they see it. And we tell them, look, they're a monopoly in this market. If we don't do some risk acceptance here and basically forego the TPRM process, or maybe shorten it down, we won't be able to operate because we have this challenge. But again, I would say those are business issues that you're going to face anytime you're in working with different corporations. There's always going to be frictions, always going to be friction.
That's wonderful. So another question. What have you done in your position as CEO to foster a more global mindset? That's a very good question.
Well, I mean, I'm a big proponent of people staying updated, right? I'm also a big proponent of making sure that people take the time to go to different countries within our, for example, when I first came here to Costa Rica, one of the things that I noticed was that our sales and service model in Costa Rica was not aligned to our, in retail banking, was not aligned to our sales and service model globally. So, you know, I sat down with my retail head and her team, and I said, look, I need you to go to Toronto. I need you to go to Trinidad. I need you to go to Chile. And I need you to go see and talk to the retail heads there and go to the branches and see how they're operating and compare that to what you're seeing here, because what I'm seeing here is that we're not following that sales and service model. So that's one thing, actually putting people on a plane and going to see other locations of Scotiabank. The other thing is we have a matrix structure. What do I mean by that? That there are certain people within my first line that don't only report to me, they also report to a functional head up in Toronto or some other location in Mexico or somewhere else. I make sure that they have regular touch bases with those people, right? Because they usually participate in conference calls that where they discuss about the different nuances and the things that are happening in the different markets. So that's a critical component of establishing a global mindset. And then, you know, you have to lead by example, right? You have to lead by example. And, you know, I usually tell people, look, I'm about to start a new course in this. I'm about to do this other thing. Just so that people understand, because the typical thing is people say, I just don't have any time. You can make the time. I mean, you can make the time. So it's about organizing yourself in a way.
Where there's a will, there's a way, right?
Exactly. So, you know, staying updated, keeping contact with staff in other locations, leading by example, that's the best way for people to have a global mindset.
So how do you balance all of your career versus your personal and family life? What's the work-life balance? You know, some of the students are asking about that in a career in international finance. Do you have a life?
I do actually. I balance, you know, that's a very personal thing. Like everybody has a different balance, right? There's not one size fits all. I will say that we've had to make sacrifices. We've had to make sacrifices. For example, I'm here in Costa Rica now. My family lives in Panama. And the reason they live in Panama is because when we were in Toronto and we were asked to come back down to Central America, my kids had been through 7 schools. Okay. And they were Adrian at the time was 14 and Gabriel was 12. And they'd been through 7 schools. And so, you know, my wife, Angela, and I, we spoke about you know, they're not anchoring themselves anywhere here. They're just traveling everywhere, right? And that has its positives, but it also has its negatives. So we decided that because I've always seen Panama as my end destination, going back to, you know, the 5 and 10 year plans, I've always seen Panama as the place where I'm going to retire. Okay. So we had bought a place there. And I said to her, look, I'm getting moved to Costa Rica. Let's send the boys back to the same school they were when they were young, where they have, you know, acquaintances. And they moved to Costa Rica, to Panama, and I travel back and forth. I oversee the Panama operation. So I spend 2 weeks here and I spend 1 week in Panama and back and forth. So there are certain sacrifices, but we've been able to work through them. And it's worked out well. But I do make time to try to stay healthy. So I exercise, and I would recommend that to anybody. Exercise, try to eat well, the best you can, organize yourself, have your plan. And I think those are the things that help you balance the work life, right? If you don't have a plan, then you're just like a ship in the ocean, and you're just being blown to where the wind is blowing. You have to have a destination in mind.
100%.
Even if it's a 5-year or even if it's a 3-year, you have to have a destination in plan.
So a few quick hitters, if I may. One is, how did you go about cultivating, you mentioned this, cultivating this culture within Scotiabank, an organizational structure? How did you put your own fingerprints, allowing other people to succeed?
Well, I think that, you know, I do a lot of touch bases and coaching. So I dedicate time to coaching to my staff. And I go beyond my first line. So I have about 12 direct reports, and then there's a second line, and then there's a series of other levels. But I walk the bank. I have social events where we invite members of different areas, all of them, right? Not just the heads, all of them. So I really do try to stay close to the staff as much as possible. And, you know, people really appreciate that. People really appreciate that because I've seen executives within the bank that like to play a sort of an Olympus role. And what do I mean by that? They're up there in Olympus, right? They're way up there, and they, you know, you can only get to them through their levels, right? And I find that's never a good strategy for building a long-term career. You have to be open to speaking with people, letting them get to know you, understand that you're human and you're vulnerable just like they are,
100%.
but that you've built a resilience factor that allows you to just get on with it. And that's really what it comes down to. When people can see you and they see your flesh and blood, and they know that you go through the same struggles they do.
You see your vulnerability, right?
Exactly.
And empathy, and we're all human.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you, Rob. So a couple others. Now, you had the advantage of being in Central America, growing up there, correct? What if I'm not from that region and I want to go to another region, South Asia, Southeast Asia, China, Eastern Europe, you know, and I'm not from those parts. How do I acclimate myself culturally? And am I going to be able to speak some of the languages? You know, how do I get over the culture shock and you know, the systems, et cetera? Any advice on that?
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of employees from both our Canadian staff and some of our Latin American staff, specifically people from Chile, that sought careers in Asia. And you know, my experience there has been that they've been more technical roles than sort of relationship roles. And what do I mean by that? For example, treasury management or treasury, um, you know, IT. These are roles where hard skills are significantly more, you know, way more on your day-to-day operations than if you're a relationship manager. That doesn't mean you can't go there if you're a relationship manager, or if the main part of your business sort of dealings is on the relationship side. But I do find that most of the people that went from Latin America and from Canada to Asia found themselves in more technical roles. And that's because obviously, you know, the technical aspects of your role in Canada are the same technical aspects of your role in Asia. So I find that to be the case. Now, I would say my recommendation to anybody is, you know, study what you want to do. So if let's say you choose, you want to go to Japan, okay, you want to go to Japan, study the first thing, get on a plane and go for a couple of days or a week or two, take a vacation to Japan. Because you might have heard that Japan is great, but until you're there and you actually live it a bit or experience it a bit, you don't really know. So the first step is, you know, try to get on a plane and take a vacation and go down there. That would be for sure something I would do. Second, study it. And more importantly, if it's part of your career development, understand how that move is going to help you with the next move, right? Because, and that's why I keep on going back to this 5 to 10 year plan, because if you just make decisions based on a single destination and not an entire journey, then you can find yourself making maybe not the most precise decisions. So I would say learn about the location before you go. If that means you have to get on a plane, we'll do so. If you have the capabilities to do so, and then understand clearly how that role that you're going to go do there is going to help you to the next go to the next level.
Absolutely.
You might find that there's actually a need within the organization for people
Yeah.
that go to Asia more than Latin America. And as a result of that, there's more opportunities there. But those are the sort of things that you have to take into consideration.
No, thank you for that. I think we have time for two more questions. One, and you've kind of addressed this earlier. A lot of our students are IB minors, not majors as well. So let's say you're an econ major or a government major or what have you, an engineering major, or electrical engineering major. Does that prevent you from seeking opportunities in international finance and banking?
Not at all. Not at all. We have lawyers, we have psychologists, we have not at all. One of the things that I have found is that going to university is all about learning how to think, learning how to problem solve, right? More than actually learning, unless you're a lawyer like yourself, or unless you're actually going to practice, let's say, structural engineering, and that's what you want to do in your life, where you're going to actually use what you learn at university consistently, because all of these skills are perishable, right? All of these skills are perishable, right? Unless you do it all the time, you lose your acumen in whatever field you've studied. So I would say that more important is when you go to university, learn how to think, learn how to problem solve. And I think those are critical factors in being able to build a career.
You nailed it. So for example, and some of the aspiring lawyers out there, I think I only utilized 10 or 15% of what I actually learned in law school. It would be just be able to read and analyze. Other than that, everything is just learning by having good mentors and going through the experiences and it's pretty fabulous once you have that mindset that you're open to learn and put in the work. One more. So you can have a normal, let's just say a normal job going into banking in the US or international type of opportunities just within the US and then piggyback off that and go abroad if your career takes you there, right? You've seen that as well?
I've seen that for sure. I've seen people within the organization. There are people that started their careers in separate banks, in the U.S., and then they ended up in Chile, working with our bank down there. There were a lot of people that worked with Bank of Boston, which is no longer with us, but Bank of Boston. There are a lot of people that worked at Bank of America, and yeah, we for sure there are opportunities to start your career in one company and finish it in another. As a matter of fact, sometimes, and I go back to the comment about calculated risks. Don't be scared to move from one company to another, okay? But make sure you understand the consequences of that. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. For example, in Latin America, the longer you stay with a corporation, you build up severance, okay? And if you decide to leave and you resign, you basically lose all of that severance, okay? Because you've decided to leave. So the company is not obliged to pay you the severance. So you have to make sure that you understand the consequences of jumping companies. But I would say if the benefits of jumping outweigh the benefits of staying, because, for example, you realize that you have no more place to go up in the corporation that you're in, and you want to continue growing, then you know what, do it.
No, it's wonderful. Couple things here. One, Robert, you are going to grace your presence at our alma mater on the 18th of April. It's coming
Yeah.
up. So I think there's a sign up sheet for the students who want to meet you.
Yep.
So that is in the chat box. I'm seeing the sign up there. So we're looking forward to meeting you in person, having you at UT, and meeting some of our fabulous students. And looking forward to meeting you in person. And finally, just thank you so much. I think this was very enlightening, and really value your time and what you've done for us.
No, thank you very much, Raj. And it's great to be going back to Austin to the alma mater. So I'm really excited to meeting you all and to meet with the students. I know Pedro, I think he's on the call. He's arranged a couple of meetings as well and different events. So I'm really, really looking forward to being there.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks to our students, and have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.